Okay, so welcome everyone to our April Backyard Wildlife Project program. And so before I introduce Brenda and her and and she does her program, I want to tell you a little bit about our Backyard Wildlife Project. But there's information on the screen there that if you want to know about the native plant sale. So if you want to take a screenshot or anything, the native plant sale, the orders start tomorrow. So that's the information on the website, and I will just let you see that and screenshot it if you want. Then I will move on to my spiel.
And I just put it in the chat.
Okay, then I can move on. Okay, so Camano is a community wildlife habitat, and we're hoping that with a lot of people sharing our endeavors, we're creating an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. So with that, um, rather than think that uh, we can't do anything when with all the development going on the island, we've decided to use the Community Wildlife Habitat Project as our action step. So you can see that there's been a lot of development, and what we want to do is to restore some corridors. So if people do things in their backyards, and a lot of people do things, then they can kind of link together and linking backyards and linking to the parks and open spaces on the island. And so it's a simple thing to do. And you can start with just grass in your yard, and then you can create a lush environment. So, like, I moved to Camano in November of 1994. So, this picture was taken that winter. And you can see we just had our tall tree and grass in the front. I live down on the beach, and then we have a strip that goes up to the road. So the front part of the yard used to have grass, and we'd go down to the beach. And we started when we didn't do it all at once. We did it in areas. And so we kind of started out with just the areas that were kind of little boxed areas, and then we went over to just take out the whole south side, the left side there of the yard, and then we moved on to the right side or the north side. And now it's very lush up there. It's in layers. And note the layering is real important. A grass and a tree is a pretty sterile environment. But if you think about ground cover like wild strawberry or kinnikinick or oh, Salal starts out that way, but then it can be bushy. So the various ground covers, and then you get your bushes, and then your understory and your tall trees. And the wildlife likes different layers of the yard, so it's a protective area, and it's on a hot summer day, it's very lush. And it's good for an island because we only have the sole source aquifer. So to have a backyard wildlife habitat, it's providing food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. And the food, shelter, and places to raise young are, a lot of that is the native plants that we use. And the plants can even provide the water, like nurse logs that you let lie in the ground after they fall. They're providing some water for the insects. A big leaf, I once saw a little frog in the leaf, and the little cone where the leaf came together is where the little frog was getting some water. So otherwise, if you don't have a water source, you can just put out the bottom of a pot, put some rocks in and such so it's not a steep edge, and there you have a water source. So there's other things to be a backyard wildlife habitat, and that's kind of salmonscaping works, with the idea that everything we do, especially on an island, goes straight into Puget Sound, and so or the Salish Sea. So here we go with various ways to do the salmonscaping. So reducing the lawn and growing natives, and Brenda will be talking about the native plants momentarily. That all helps with water conservation. You don't necessarily have to be a purist right away, but it's a check off. And as you get more into the gardening, then perhaps the reducing and eliminating pesticides and fertilizer use will kind of go with as you progress, because it's backyard wildlife habitat is a work in progress. So I know tonight before the program I realized my hummingbird feeder was down to nearly nothing. So I cleaned that out and put it back up. And the hummingbird is happy. Hummingbirds are happy now. So it kind of makes you conscientious of what, or it makes me and others conscientious of what we're doing in our garden, so that we're coexisting with the wildlife and nature. And it's kind of nice with the community wildlife habitat, because by doing that, we're working together and we do restore habitat and make it a nicer spot for us to live as well as the critters. So to be a wildlife habitat, it's a simple application. It's merely checking off how you're providing food, water, shelter, and places to raise young, and also practicing sustainable or responsible gardening techniques. Though you only need a couple things. You need 3 things for food, and you can put up bird feeders or you don't have to. All of it can be done with just the plants you put in your yard. If you put up the feeders and that such, then you have to remember to clean them and be conscientious about the fact that these are things you're putting up and they do need to be maintained. So the checkoff is simple. No one checks it over. The National Wildlife Federation, which is the organization that does the certification, they do add up the acreage, so they can kind of know how much land is certified. So in the United States, there's more than 200,000, more than 250,000 certified wildlife habitats. And on Camano, we have 1,043. So our project is it's quite a nice project. It's our action step. Once you're certified, and the yards may be a little bit, they're not, they're maybe a little bit messier because you leave the seeds on and you let things dry up, and you can think of things as having areas in your yard. Like area 1 is close to the house, and that is probably more pristine and has more ornamentals. Area 2 is kind of where you use it, but not as much. And in area 3 could be like the back part of the yard that you don't go to very often. Russell Link, he wrote the book Landscaping for Wildlife and Living with Wildlife, came up with these zones, and he is a wildlife biologist for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so we're hoping that these area 3s will link up. And then when people put up signs, I get calls and people say, hey, how can I do that? I'm doing that right now. How can I get a sign? So once you're certified wildlife habitat, you can either get a sign from the National Wildlife Federation or you can get one from us. And that is kind of a way to just kind of it kind of shows that what you're doing in your yard is purposeful. If someone thinks it's not as tidy as they would like if you let a dandelion go because different things kind of like going at it like insects and such, then it's okay. So you can see that there's these dots are wildlife habitats, and they're spread all throughout the island. So that's getting into our goal of trying to restore corridors. We do have neighborhood habitats on the island. So if your neighborhood has like 25% of your neighbors are certified wildlife habitats, I have a sign that is looking for a place to go at the neighborhood wildlife habitat on Camano. And these are all the wildlife habitats in Washington State. There are 18 now, and Tukwila was the very first in the state and the 4th in the nation, excuse me. And Camano was the 10th in the nation and the 2nd in the state. And so Washington is a bit of a regional wildlife habitat in the Puget Sound area. And there are now 153 wildlife habitat communities in the nation. So it's a cool project the National Wildlife Federation did. They started out in 1973 as a backyard wildlife habitat project to certify urban areas. And then it's gone beyond just single homes and decks and rooftop gardens into acreage on the larger spots like Camano. And so here's where you can get more information from the National Wildlife Federation. They have a terrific website. They have different things about native plants on that. And then our website that Roxy did is terrific. You can go back to our old programs. You can get our native plant list, and lots of different things are on it. So take a look at that as well. And these are the 2 books I mentioned, Living with Wildlife and Landscaping for Wildlife. These are especially nice because they are by Russell Link, and and then the wildlife biologists in the state, and so they're really geared to the Pacific Northwest. And then the National Wildlife Federation has their book, and it's their second edition. And with that, so just our little call to fame that we are Community Wildlife Habitat, and we've been certified since 2005. So our action step is continuing. If you'd like to get more involved with it, please let us know. So with that, I will introduce Brenda. So with that, Brenda is kind of, she basically does our April program since forever, because native plants, the native plant sale is going on in April, and people are interested in gardening in April. So Brenda, let me tell you about her. She's a biologist and an artist. She worked for the National Park Service. She also worked for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. She retired as the stewardship director for the Skagit Land Trust, and now she manages the Washington Native Plant Society display garden for the Salal chapter of the Washington Native Plant Society in Mount Vernon. She was the former chair of the Salal chapter, and she is a master gardener. And I have Skagit Audubon. Were you with Skagit Audubon as well, Brenda?
No, I'm a member, but
Okay, I was going to ask you before. So anyway, Brenda is she gives wonderful programs, and I'm so glad she's spending another April evening program with us. So welcome, Brenda, and thank you so much.
oh, thank you, Val. And I should say one of the reasons April is so important is it has been recognized for many years now by the state. Usually the governor declares it Native Plant Appreciation Month. And so if this is just one of many programs that are going on, there's just ever since COVID started, the WNPS, that's the Washington Native Plant Society, has really done a good job of recording webinars, getting speakers, and putting programs together, really urging each chapter in the state to do special programs during the month of April. So it's not just the plant sale, it's actually the whole state is working on Native Plant Appreciation Month. And I urge viewers to check out our website at wnps.org and look at the list of webinars that are recorded or ongoing. There's a live one with Dr. Doug Talmy at the end of the month that you would need to register for. That one I'm sure is not going to be recorded, and he's a fantastic speaker about birds and the importance of backyard habitat. So I will start sharing my screen here, I guess is the best thing to do right now. Takes a moment for it to, there. So I assume everybody can hear me okay. If not, just speak up, one of you guys, and I'll try to monitor the chat if people want to put questions in, but of course there'll be time at the end, and I'm happy to stay to answer questions. Trying to get this out of my way. Okay. So yeah, so everybody seems concerned, of course they should be, about climate and what's happening in our gardens as a result of climate change, whether you're seeing drier conditions, hotter conditions, heat domes, something I'd never heard of before in the summer, or more flooding, king tides, erosion issues in the winter that we hadn't been seeing before either. So I thought, well, I think it might be of interest if we can talk a little bit about what we can do in our own yards to prepare for climate resilience or climate changes. But the first message I always try to impart when I'm giving a program is I hope that all of you are open to the idea of thinking of plants as more than just entertainment. I use this picture just because primroses are fine. It's just that they tend to be pulled out when they get kind of ratty and eaten up and stuff. And they seem to be just a very early spring. Everybody's eager for a flower because it's springtime, and so they put these in, but they're not really meant for serving an ecological function in our environment. And plants really do that. I mean, plants are so important to our health and well-being, and serve all kinds of purposes for us, that I urge people to think about them as more than just decorative items in the landscape. This slide is just an example of what people call ecosystem services. That is, that plants provide a lot of services to us that if they weren't there, we would end up expending a lot of money to provide those services ourselves. So, of course, flood control comes to mind first of all, and filtering water, holding on to the banks of streams, pollination, providing food for the pollinators. But then there are other things that plants provide to us that we don't necessarily think about consciously, like recreation, spirituality, the calmness you might feel in going through a garden, and the benefit for your mental health. Photosynthesis. I mean, plants feed us, they feed animals that we eat. They're super important. So this is just trying to capture the concept of ecosystem services, that plants really are providing us a lot of services. And I think that we need to be conscious of that when we're choosing what plants to put into our yards. And why native species? The emphasis on native species lately, and again, I'm tying it back to climate resilience, is they are adapted to our soils and our climate. We notoriously have dry summers. We don't tell others who outside the Northwest that we actually have really pleasant summers generally, and wet winters. And that can be really hard on some species of plants that we bring in from other places. An example is, I love fruit trees. I'm not a purist. I don't have nothing but native plants in my own yard, and I live in the city in Mount Vernon. But so I do have fruit trees, and it's pretty hard on fruit trees to be sitting there in soggy soil all winter, and then extreme dry conditions in the summer. So there's an example of a plant that, yes, we want to have that, but we need to take care of it differently because it's not adapted to our climate. Native plants generally use less water. There are certainly some examples. There are certainly native plants that thrive in water, but most of the ones we choose for landscaping don't require a lot of excess or additional watering. And same goes for fertilizers. Yes, you could fertilize native plants, but they really don't benefit from it that much, and it can just leach down into the groundwater. So it's probably best not to do that. And in general, they have lower maintenance. As I said, I am not a purist, and I have a variety of things going on in my yard, fruit trees, but also vegetable gardening. And so I like that the native plant parts of my yard require a lot less maintenance, and it's nice to be able to then spend that time on the other things like fruit trees and vegetables. And then providing for pollinators. Again, one of the things people are really concerned about, and not just with climate change, but with disease and our food systems, worrying about making sure that our food gets pollinated and we continue with production. We want to make sure we provide for our pollinators, and they have intrinsic value as well. So we certainly are concerned and want to provide for pollinators. So, I'm not gonna, I've done a whole program just about native plants for pollinators, but I took some slides out of that to illustrate, to remind me of some of the highlights of that. Is the Xerces Society, its goal is the conservation, the preservation of insects, the biodiversity of insects, and they have 5 tenets that they talk about for providing for insects. That is, the number one is plant native species, and it's because so many insects are co-evolved with our native species. They depend heavily on a native species for the food for their larvae, and so it's important that we not eliminate all native species in an area, because that won't provide habitat or sustenance for those insects, including pollinators. Here's an illustration out of it's getting to be, gosh, 23-year-old journal, or yeah, 13-year-old journal now, but the green bars are indicating the number of species or the number of individuals of insects on native species of plants in a yard, same yards, and then the non-native species of plants are the blue bars. So you can see it's quite dramatic that you have not only more insects on native plants than non-native, but you also have a greater number of species, so more diversity on the native species of plants rather than the non-native. And some of the importance of that I can get into about, this is Doug Tallamy's work that I mentioned his program at the end of this month with WNPS. His work is focused on the connection between larvae of insects and bird populations. And birds are really dependent on insect diversity to feed their young, even hummingbirds. That are nectar feeders. They need insect protein for their baby birds. So if you want to see birds and you want to preserve bird habitat, you really need to make sure you have native plants in your area. One of the tools to use for picking out native plants that's pretty cool to look at is this one that the National Wildlife Federation put together about butterflies. So they were able to, this is a beta version, so you'll see some examples that are not perfect in here or exactly accurate maybe, but if you go to their website, and I will have a link to their website that I will send to Roxy, and she's going to send it out to you guys or put it on the website anyway. But you go to this native plant finder with the National Wildlife Federation and you put in your zip code, and then it will come up with plant suggestions. And you can barely see it on this, but like at the strawberry, there's a number 76 next to a butterfly. And what they're saying there is there are 76 species of butterflies or moths in our area that rely on strawberries for hosting their caterpillars. The violet one, you can barely see, is 27 species, and goldenrod is 59 species. So you can kind of get a feel for what are the species of plants that are going to host the most butterflies and moths in my area. That's of interest. Another way to look at that same site is to pick a butterfly species that's in your area and see what species of plants should I be looking at planting in order to attract those and to host those butterfly species. The mourning cloak is a fairly common butterfly. You may have seen it, and so I picked that one thinking, well, yeah, that's a species I have a chance of seeing here, and wouldn't it be nice if I provided them the plants on which to lay their eggs and have larvae so that we can have more mourning cloaks. That's just one example of the connection between native plants and insects. The second thing mentioned by the Xerxes Society is to put your plants in clusters. One of the reasons, like on a fruit tree again, you have thousands and thousands of blossoms all at once, and you go past a fruit tree in bloom. If you're lucky, it'll be abuzz with insects. That's true for native plant or any kind of flowering displays you have, rather than having a single example of a plant kind of scattershot here and there, or having a beautiful mix of colors but spread apart. It's better for the insects or for the bees if you put a lot of your similar plants, all the same species, in a bigger cluster. Because it's true, I've seen this in the wild. Bumblebees in particular are very true to pollinating the same species of plant again and again. So I've seen a meadow where there's 3 species of flowers. Bees are visiting all 3, but if you track one bee, it's going to the same flower again and again and again. So that makes bees very good at pollinating because they're loyal to one species, at least for that day or that hour, and they end up carrying goldenrod pollen to another goldenrod, to another goldenrod, to another goldenrod, rather than taking goldenrod pollen to a completely like a echinacea to a completely unrelated plant where it will be wasted basically. So this is a way to support your pollinators, your bumblebees. A third tenet that they have in the Xerxes Society is to choose plants that flower in different times. So they have a link to a PDF or a website you can look at examples of plants that bloom really early in the season, pick out some that bloom early, mid, and late. Same with perennials as well as shrubs and trees, and you're more likely to then support pollinators through the entire season. And later in my program, I will point out some really early blooming shrubs, working towards late blooming shrubs. It's nice to have something in bloom as long as possible. And Val was alluding to a little bit messier yard. There's got to be some way we've got to promote this and make it more acceptable to have, I don't know where, we're not all living on golf courses in Scotland, why we ended up with all these great expanses of lawn, but it really can be quite attractive to see the stems left on flowering plants over the winter. And it turns out it is important for bees. They burrow into those. In some cases, they're overwintering. In some cases, they're nesting. I've had a little bit of fun kind of cracking some of these open to see what's inside them. I don't want to do too many and end up killing bees, but it is interesting to open up some of these stems and see who all is living in there. So it's kind of a fun little exercise to do in your yard. And people often ask me, well, when is the right time to start cleaning up the yard? And I think the rule of thumb is something like if it's staying in the 50s, at least during the day, it's okay. So we're at that stage now where you can start taking the debris off the top of your perennial flowers and composting it or putting it off to the side or whatever you want to do with it. But other things you could do earlier, you could cut some of those stems off if it really bothers you and maybe bundle them and put them in a crotch of a tree or put them someplace where the insects can still use them. But if you can tolerate having it left standing, we're going to set a new standard for what a lawn needs to look like, our yard. Another thing to provide for insects is to leave some open ground for ground nesting bees. A lot of I think it might be something like 70% of our bumblebees are ground nesters. And so they will burrow. The very first bumblebees that you see coming out are females, queens, who have overwintered, and they often are patrolling just 2 or 3 inches above the ground, looking for places where they can start burrowing and laying eggs for the next generation. And so I see them going under bunch grasses as well as under native strawberry plants. And if you can just leave some areas of bare ground, I think it works to have a little bit of protection, like the leaves of a strawberry plant or something, for them to get under and then start burrowing. So I've also had bumblebees nest in a bird box that I'd left up, and that was fine. They took over the birdhouse for the season, and they filled it up with their wax and such, and it was just fun to watch. Back to these issues that I talked about, the reasons that native plants are beneficial for climate resilience, and I want to bring that back to this idea: is if we provide the most diversity of native plants, if we can support as many of the native species like pollinators, butterflies, bees, other insects, mammals, we're more likely to have a closer to intact ecosystem as we get through. Well, we're going to have more tools in the chest, so to speak, get through whatever climate change is going to be throwing at us here. So I just want to promote saving all the pieces, having as many options possible as we go into seeing sea level rise and temperature changes and and of course storm fluctuations that we haven't seen before. And another thing to me that's near and dear to me about native plants is the sense of place. I've lived here about 30 years, and having lived in other parts of the United States and even a little bit overseas, it's really interesting to me how we can embrace this wonderful palette of native plants we have to choose from for our landscaping. There's just spectacular plants, and I feel like, why plant something you buy at a nursery that's exactly the same as somebody in Florida or Massachusetts? There's some plants that are mass produced for the national market, if not even the global market, and they can be wonderful plants, but they tend to be the same everywhere. Whereas we should at least pick a few plants that are native and unique to the Northwest, like in our yard. Two examples. The one on the left is our state flower, is the Pacific rhododendron. It's a lovely rhododendron that tolerates shade. And then shooting stars. There's at least 2 species, maybe 3 or 4. 2 are very easily accessible, but they make a lovely little garden plant and are blooming right now. So where do I find these native plants, or how do I choose out of this huge palette of wonderful plants? What do I choose? Well, you got to use the same principles that we do with any gardening. This is the mantra of the master gardeners: right plant, right place. So don't plant a cluster of different plants that like different cultural requirements in one place. If something likes it dry and well drained, plant that with other things that like it dry and well drained. If something wants some shade, plant it in a shady spot with other shade loving plants. So right plant, right place, basic stuff. Figure out what your goals or desires are. Are you looking for evergreen for the winter? Are you looking for fruit for wildlife or for yourself, or cut flowers? I've had some lovely bouquets that I've made from my yard out of cut flowers, all native plants. And then use plant finder guides and plant lists. Again, I will send Roxy something to post on the website that is a series of links. There are several different plant finder guides to look at. And what I mean by that is searchable sites where you can put in characteristics you're looking for. Like, I'm looking for a ground cover that tolerates shade and is evergreen, and it will generate a list of native plants that fit those characteristics. And then, of course, visit display gardens. I do co-manage a display garden that's entirely native plants to Western Washington, and it's adjacent to the WSU research station on Memorial Highway, just west of Mount Vernon. I'll show you an aerial photograph, I think. So this is an example of web links. Don't worry about writing all these down right now, or you could do a screenshot if you can, but we will post this on the Camano website so that you guys can get access. These hot linked then, which would be better. So the display garden, I hope that many of you have been to the display garden. You may not recognize it from this photo because it's actually that combination of the master gardener discovery garden with parking lot. That's about 1.5 acres. And then our native plant display garden is behind that, and it's about 1/2 acre. Here's an aerial picture. This is Memorial Highway, and the WSU research station is right here, the big campus building, Sakuma Auditorium and such. So this is between Mount Vernon and Anacortes, just west of Avon Allen Road. And the gardens are open during all daylight hours, and there's a toilet block there, which makes it really convenient if you've got family or friends visiting and you want to go to Deception Pass or take a day driving tour. It's a great place to come and bring family and friends and just have even a picnic lunch. So there's a parking lot here. There's a master gardeners have this big display garden. As I say, it's about 1.5 acres, and there are 29 different little rooms of gardens there. So it's everything from an herb garden to a rose garden, a heather garden, a enabling garden, which shows you examples of ways to create raised beds, or what kinds of plants might be more attractive for somebody who's visually impaired. They have vegetable gardens, just a whole bunch of different activities going on here. Great fun to spend several hours at that spot. And then to the west of that is a fruit orchard that is run by another group of volunteers, and they're Western Washington tree fruit growers. I just call them fruit growers because it's so hard to remember the whole name, but they are wonderful people. They are there every Thursday from about 9 a.m. to noon or even later. But if you have a fruit tree question, Thursdays, 9 a.m. to noon, it's a great time to just show up there. You'll find them towards the back, towards the south end, where they have their sheds, and or scattered throughout the whole thing, and you can ask them questions, and they're very open to having people work alongside them, or just come ask questions. They love to talk about fruit. And then we have our little half-acre native plant garden that was established in about 1998. This entire area in the late 90s or mid 90s was a blank slate. It had been farmed, it was cleared, flat, no contours, and certainly no trees. So everything you see there has been established since mid 90s. So a lot of plants, you can look up tons of information now about cultural requirements of plants, how tall they're going to get, specifics about them. But I just wanted to go through the highlights of a few that I think are especially good ones that you should think about trying to find a spot in your yard for. Bitter cherry, it's our native cherry tree, Prunus emarginata, very attractive to pollinators. We have just one in the native garden. And I should point out, if you go to visit our native plant display garden, keep in mind, we do not water any of the plants. So granted, you'd think, oh, it's Skagit farmland, it's rich. Well, it's very compacted, both by glaciers and by previous farming practices. It's really poorly drained soil. Maybe quite different from Camano Island soil, but still keep in mind that it's gets just as dry as every place else, cracked soil in the summer, and we don't have volunteers to water, nor do we want to. We want these plants to develop deep roots and be able to sustain themselves with the water that's available. So the bitter cherry is a great blooming, beautiful tree to have, and very attractive pollinators. Cascara, on the other hand, also attractive to pollinators, but loves it wet. So, or I should say it tolerates it wet. This is planted in a spot, I don't know if you can see, there's quite a bit of horsetail around the base and some lady ferns, but it will tolerate having wet feet for days at a time and then be pretty much dried out all during the summer. And some people say this is one of the most attractive trees for bees. They come to the white flowers in the spring, and then there's a black berry produced in the summer that's really good for birds. Oops. I might have messed something up there. Birches. A lot of us are familiar with the white paper birches that are so common in the cities around here, at least in Mount Vernon they are. But we have a native birch in Washington, the river birch, that has more of, instead of a bright white bark, it has more of a salmony colored bark. And it also produces yellow leaves in the fall, which is really nice. And again, is very attractive to birds as well as insects. It's one of my favorite trees. Gary oak. A lot of folks may not realize that we have an oak species in Washington state. The Gary oak is also known as the Oregon white oak, and Oak Harbor is named after it, which is often a surprise for people, but it likes well-drained soil, so you might find it it may do quite well on Camano Island. And I encourage people, if you're going to Oak Harbors, we're at the very northern edge, I should say, in Skagit County. And Island County probably has more oaks, certainly, than Skagit does, but the kind of the furthest north that the oaks are found is along Chuckanut Drive, and there's some on Samish Island. And then as you go further south in their range, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. The ones on Samish are quite small. But if you were to be traveling through Oak Harbor, I recommend you take a little detour and go over to a place called Smith Park, a one city block in the heart of the old part of Oak Harbor, which in itself, that's worth a visit just to see that there is an old downtown. In that one city block, the only trees in there are Gary oaks, and they're gorgeous. They're these enormous, large diameter trees with beautiful branches, and provide just a lovely shady park in the summer. So Google that, and you're driving through Oak Harbor. It's not very far off of the Highway 20 throughway there, but it is worth just that little quarter-mile off the highway to go check it out. So Oak Harbor and Smith Park, great place to see Gary oaks. Shore pines, I think, are going to be an important tree for us as we get into drier and drier summers. They are so resilient to what I think of as very dry conditions in the summer and very wet conditions in the winter. So when I was working for Skagit Land Trust, we would actually use shore pine in wetland restoration projects. They can tolerate sitting in a wet spot where their feet are wet during the winter and then completely dry in the summer. I think they're just tolerant of really poor nutritional conditions, so they can outcompete other conifers in these poor conditions. So, shore pine, that's what we call it here in the Northwest, in the Rocky Mountains. The same species, but a different subspecies, is called lodgepole pine, because it grows straight and narrow, but here in the Northwest, it's very contorted, Pinus contorta. Willows, I just put this one in here. Not everybody has place for a willow because it does like it wet, and but it is an important wildlife plant for insects, butterflies in particular. And so I just wanted to put in a plug for willows. If you have a space for one, it's a lovely tree to have. They're shrub, all shrub. And here's where I wanted to mention the chronology or phenology of when things are blooming for the benefit of our bees and hummingbirds. I think one of the very earliest things you'll see blooming around here is the evergreen huckleberry. It's a very tiny little huckleberry flower, and yet you'll see bees and even hummingbirds feeding on it. They know it's there, even though it might be quite small for us. It's a nice alternative to Japanese holly. It's looks very similar to it, almost looks like a boxwood. It's got a small evergreen leaf. They're slow growing, but well worth it, and provide winter interest because of their evergreen nature. And what's blooming right now around here is tall Oregon grape. And although it has a yellow flower, it's quite attractive to hummingbirds. So, and bees too, of course. So you'll see a lot of insects using the tall Oregon grape. And it's also evergreen. So I recommend it when people are trying to create a screen between them and their neighbors, or if they want something that's evergreen for winter. It's also, it can grow quite tall and kind of, say, growing up in canes from the base. And so you can reshape it by cutting down some of those canes if it's getting too big. But I was describing to Roxy and Val before the program started, seeing an Anna's hummingbird the other day. She wasn't feeding on the flowers. She could have been, but she was looking for insects. And that was a sign that she probably has young on a nest already. They do nest very early, the Anna's hummingbirds do. And she was poking at the underside of the tall Oregon grape leaves. And after she left, I turned over a leaf to see what could she possibly be getting. And they were very minute little, probably some sort of mite or maybe an aphid, but they were very, very tiny. And she was getting 2 or 3 from each leaf. So just an example of how important these plants are. And in the succession of blooming, kind of an early summer bloomer is the 9-bark, a lovely big shrub that kind of has arcing branches that come out and these white clusters of white flowers on them. It's kind of fun. One of our volunteers really likes to collect seeds and grow plants from seeds if he can. He gives it a try. It's just a project of his. And he was expressing frustration that he was never able to get seeds from his 9-bark, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. He'd get out there and the seeds would all be gone. And last year he discovered what was taking them, and it was flocks of bush tits. So the little bird bush tit was coming through, swarming the ball of flowers or seed heads and taking off, and every last seed was gone. So he wasn't getting any seeds, but he thought that was just fine. And I mentioned in this slide that there are a lot of cultivars of 9-bark, and I know it's a popular plant in the nursery industry to sell 9-barks that have different colored leaves, like red leaves or bronze colored leaves. And those are very attractive, I'll admit, and they offer some variety in the otherwise sea of green. But I just advise people to use them sparingly, because those red colors make the leaf less palatable for insects. So again, if you are providing nothing for the insects to survive, you won't be providing anything for the birds either. I like to think of it's best for gardeners to get used to. It's a healthier place if you see damage on your leaves in the form of insect chewings or little cutouts from insects eating on the leaves. Well, that's a really good sign. That means you're providing food for insects. They're likely going to be beneficial insects, whether they be pollinators or predators of harmful insects. You know, we want those wasps and other bugs that eat the aphids. So if you had nothing but a tree or shrub with very perfect leaves and no damage on them at all, I say, well, you might as well have a sculpture. It's not providing any habitat for anybody. It's better if you have plants that have a little bit of damage. Another favorite plant of mine is the beaked hazelnut. It's lovely. It's about to burst open with leaves right now. It already bloomed. It isn't a pollinator attracting plant for blooming. It pollinated, wind pollinated, I believe. But the fruit, of course, is very attractive to all kinds of animals, whether it's jays or squirrels. So the beaked hazelnut is more like a shrubby version of the commercial filberts. And the nuts are pretty small. I'm sure that people have eaten them. Perhaps it was an important native food for native people, but I don't know of anybody collecting them these days. They are quite small, but a really attractive shrub to have in your yard. And serviceberry is going to be blooming soon as well, and it produces an edible purple fruit, although it's quite small, and I think it's probably best left for the birds to eat. Again, these are just examples. There's lots more. I'll just highlight a few more here. Red elderberry, it's really attractive to birds, and I know of a few places in my area where when the red berries are ripe. They're very astringent, and they probably aren't poisonous, but people don't eat them because they're not palatable, really. Maybe they'd give you a stomach ache, I'm not sure, but nobody really wants to eat them. But birds like the western tanager love to eat these. So they're very attractive. When you see a red elderberry with the red berries themselves on the fruit, you could stop and watch and see who comes. You'll likely see some birds there. They're also very attractive to bees when they're blooming. And then in the winter, the stems are hollow and they dry up, and they are important places for bees to overwinter. So again, if you have room for a red elderberry in your yard, it's a nice one. And then the last one I have in the shrubs here for blooming would be ocean spray. It kind of blooms really late summer, August or so, and it's quite showy and can be an attractive addition to your yard. Highlighting a few of the herbaceous plants. This is a goldenrod. That's a late bloomer in the fall, and early bloomers would be camas and lupin. Checker mallow looks sort of like a small version of a hollyhock, and Clarkia is an annual plant that reseeds and is spectacular pink blossom in early June. So here are some examples of lupin, the big leaf lupin. There's a common plant called the meadow rue. This is another one where you may see cultivars in nurseries, but fun thing about it is it has these little dangly flowers, and I would say it's a plant that is attractive because of the motion it produces. We have used it in the garden, the display garden, to mask the presence of horsetail. There's this wet, soggy patch here where these aspen are growing that has a lot of horsetail growing. And by planting meadow rue, the meadow rue comes up kind of at the same pace as the horsetail does. And pretty soon you just don't even see the horsetail because of the meadow rue. But in addition to that, when the wind blows, these little kind of dangly flowers rustle, and people seem to find that very, very attractive. We have evergreen ferns and deciduous ferns, and the sword fern is your friend. Boy, it's a go-to plant, and I recommend planting it close together so you don't have to weed in between. People often ask, do I cut off the fronds? Again, maybe in that zone 1 that Al was talking about close to your house, you might want to cut the fronds off in the spring. Don't do it in the fall, because the plant really provides a lot of those fronds that are starting to brown and fall over, are providing a lot of shelter and habitat for birds and other wildlife. But if you really want to trim those off, you can do that probably in March or early April. And then the new fiddleheads that come up are very vibrant and green. But I tend to leave as many, especially the back row. You know, I might do that at the very front row of the display garden, but in the even one tier back, I would just leave all the fronds on, and it's makes for a healthier plant in the long run. And then I didn't have a picture here of deer fern, but that's another commonly available fern that's good to plant really close together, and then you don't have to weed in between. These are both shade-loving plants. And then a lot of people love maidenhair fern. It is a gorgeous fern. It's deciduous, so you won't see it in the winter. And it is quite tolerant of different habitats, even though we see it in the wild, usually in a place where it's getting splashed by water from a stream or on a bank that has a trickle of water coming down it. They're actually quite garden friendly. They could be on flat ground. I wouldn't say super dry, but if you have a little bit of a shady spot that's kind of moist through the summer. I mean, I have some in several places where they're not in full sun, but they're not in a place that's damp all summer long either. So and they do just fine. And they can get quite robust and large. And then you can split them. It turns out maidenhair fern sometimes in gardens will be a foot in diameter at the base. And if you dug that up and actually cut it, you can make multiple ferns from that. And then the other two I mentioned here, lady and oak fern, are also deciduous ferns that are commonly available. Couple of ground covers that you might not have seen before. This mountain avens, it's a dryas, D-R-Y-A-S, and dryas are found all across the northern hemisphere. And this one is usually found at about 6,000 feet in the Cascades, but it does just fine in at sea level. So this is in my yard in Mount Vernon, and pretty little white flowers. And if you let them go to seed, they have this fun little kind of Dr. Seuss that is attractive as well. And then we have at least 3, maybe 6 species of sedums that are native and pretty easy to find at nurseries. Most of them tend to have yellow flowers as opposed to white ones, and they're very easy to propagate from just little bits that fall off of them can start new plants, and they can make a great ground cover evergreen. And you can plant bulbs or other flowers that can come up between them during the early season and then die back, and makes for a nice display. And then we have 3 species of strawberry in Western Washington that are pretty readily available. My favorite is the beach strawberry. It has the most evergreen leaf and kind of a shiny, tough green leaf, and makes a great ground cover. This is one I've seen bumblebees hovering underneath the burrows for their homes. And rumor has it the strawberry is quite tasty, but I never seem to get any. I think all the animals eat them before I get them. And last but not least, a few bulbs, the camas. Camas, even though it's a purple flower, not red, it's still attractive to hummingbirds for the nectar. And camas will reproduce by seed very readily. So if you get a few started in a patch, the next year you'll have 10, the next year you'll have 100. Some people don't like plants that do that fill in and create a big display of one color. So this is very easy to control. You just cut the seed heads off before they open. I mean, before the seeds turn into pods, or the flowers, I should say, turn into pods, and they stay closed up for quite a while. So you don't have to get them on a particular day. You just go out there when those pods are starting to form. The purple color is long gone, and you can just cut those off and not have any additional plants if you don't want them. Camas is still, I think, an important food for Native Americans. And last year we dug up a bed of camas we had because it was so thick with flowers. We thought, let's take out the biggest ones and see what those bulbs look like. And we had them in our fall sale, and they were like small tulip bulb size. They were quite large. They were probably 10 years old. And it made me understand better how that could be a food source for people, because the bulb was so large. And then trillium. The only thing I wanted to say about trillium, again, it's pretty readily available at commercial nurseries. That's the place to buy it. Some people do still try to dig things up if they see them in the wild. And of course, unless you're the property owner or have permission from the property owner, you really shouldn't do that. A lot of our native bulbs will burrow deeper and deeper each year. So as they grow, I think they're twisting and getting deeper and deeper. So both trillium and camas can be quite deep, and it fools people. They dig down thinking they've gotten it plenty deep, and they snap off that stem from the bulb, and that really kills the plant. So the best thing is to just get some from a reputable source, or try growing them from seed. I've done that. It does take years. And so, be prepared that when you're buying a trillium that's ready to bloom, it probably means it's 5, 6, or even 7 years old. Keep that in mind when you see the price for trillium at nurseries. Which segue into buying native plants. Okay, we've got conservation district sales. Those are over, unfortunately, for the spring. They are bare root. Watch for them next spring. I really like the Snohomish County Conservation District sale and the Skagit Conservation District sale. It's worth looking at both of those to see what species they have to offer. They usually distribute the plants in February, which is a great time to get plants and get them in the ground. This year it was a little cold, but it was an exceptionally cold year. I think most years that timing would be great. The plants are dormant then, so and they are very inexpensive. It's a really good way to buy a lot of plants. The Washington Native Plant Society, we have chapter sales in just a few of the chapters. I think before COVID, there were a lot more plant sales, but the good news is there's a lot of private nurseries that are now selling native plants. Oh, and so as Val was mentioning, we have a native plant sale, our online sale. This is for the Salal chapter, starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If you haven't been to it before, when it was in person, it was quite crowded. People, like 100 people would be lined up to get into the store. And it was, you know, a difficult thing to manage that way. Online, it's still crowded. So it can be frustrating, but you have a particular plant you want to get, you can go to the store right now and browse through the store and see what we have for sale and make your plan for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Or you can just sit back and wait till the crowd thins out and get on there later in the day and see what's left. Very popular plants that will sell out within the first hour. And then we've tried to get as much inventory as we can. We grow some things from seed and have a lot of those, and then some things we buy from wholesalers. And some of our volunteers are really good about propagating plants. So we have a wide diversity of 115, 119 species of plants for sale. And if you don't see something that you really, really want, let me know, and I might tell you might be able to tell you where a private nursery has some, or that we have some preparing for the fall sale. The Skagit County, because I'm Skagit oriented, but Skagit County Master Gardener Plant Fair, I'm sure the Snohomish one has native plants as well. So there's more and more native plants available at these Master Gardener Plant Fairs. And then commercial nurseries, if you just were to, I hate to favor one or two particular nurseries, but if you were to do a search on your web engine for native plants in our area, I think you'd be surprised how many different nurseries are selling native species. And they're especially for landscapers, but they often do retail sales, and you can find more and more variety of native species in commercial nurseries, and that's great. More power to them. We're really encouraged to see that. And then mail order, there are a couple of companies that you can mail order seeds from, and that's very fun to, you know, it's hit and miss. There are some species that do really well, and some we can't figure out what we need to do, but I generally will put a flat, like a tray full of soil, tamp it down, sprinkle the seeds on, put a little bit more soil on top, but not very much, and cover it to protect it from the birds, and wait and see what happens. Sometimes we end up with so many plants we can't believe it, and it's a fun thing to try. And you can always try collecting or saving your own seeds. So, and this picture in the lower right, that's the Clarkia. That's a native annual. It's not generally found this far north but in Washington State, but it does just fine, and it's can be a really fun flush of pink in the early summer. I think that's the end of my program, so I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll look in chat here. Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, so someone from experience has tried the red elderberry. Yeah. There's a few books out like the Pojar and McKinnon, which is a plant identification book for the Pacific Northwest, has a lot of information about indigenous uses or uses of plants by indigenous people. And I'm sure in that one you can find out what the scoop is on red elderberry. But yeah, I've never heard of anybody recommending it. The blue elderberry, which is native to Eastern Washington and does grow here in Western Washington a little bit, it does fine in gardens as well, and it can be a good plant for the berries. People love it for the berries to make jam. I don't know why video is so bad.
What is this, the native plant? Wait tomorrow.
So you're welcome to unmute and ask your question verbally, or you can go ahead and type in the chat, whatever is easiest. Anybody else have any other questions?
Oh, good question. West-facing slope erosion control plants, full sun. I know they're shallow rooted, but they're actually good at controlling erosion. Is our native strawberries. So maybe because they have a variety of depth of roots, they're like a commercial strawberry in that they have a crown with roots that radiate out from that, but they also probably break up the water movement on the slope because of the tangliness of their runners and the different leaves and stuff. So I heard that recommended by people, and I thought, oh yeah, that does make sense that it would be a good erosion control plant. As Roxy can tell you, it only takes a few.
I bought 3 and they would have covered my property, but they're not hard to pull out if they spread to someplace you don't want. So I think they're wonderful plants. I love them.
And if you're taking out, like we took out the ivy on the west slope, and it's hard to get something to plant, and you have the bare soil, but that would be great. I didn't think of that because they fill in really nicely. They're quick ground cover. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a place in my front yard where sewer work had been done, and it was just raw ground, and I had other things I had to do and renovations on the house or whatever, and I didn't have time to do anything else. So I just put strawberries in that bed, and now as I add other plants to add diversity and structure to it, it's very easy to go in and pull up a bunch to compost, and then I've got nice clean soil with no weeds in it that I.
Okay, Barbara has her hand up.
Yeah. Speaking of the beach strawberry, I've had the problem. I had a beautiful bed, and now I can't seem to get it going again. I put new plants in. Does anyone have any thoughts as to why? I do have a lot of fir needles, and I'm wondering if that smothers them, but I would love to get my strawberries growing again. No thoughts.
Yeah. What has anything else about the site changed? Like, is there now shade where there wasn't before? Or
No, it's pretty much, it has been dry, and the area of the bed that gets a little bit more shade is doing a little bit better. But, I've interspersed a new planting. I think I bought 2 flats of new beach strawberries and interspersed them, and they're not doing that well either. So all I could think of is the fir needles. So I'm just curious, since we were talking about them, if anyone had any ideas.
Hmm.
Well, the fir needles would make it hard for the runners to get
Well,
established.
yeah, the
Put
runners
down
are fine.
roots.
Yeah, the runners are fine and the runners are out in my paths.
Oh,
But yeah, anyway, so I don't know, but I'd put the bed in about 20 years ago and it used to be beautiful and now it's really sad, as Brenda's heard my seed bed story.
so is it too shady?
I don't know. I don't know. But all it's good for is growing other seedlings. So
Hmm.
just wondered if anyone had any ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll think about that some more, Barbara, and maybe,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
And I see that Jennifer wanted a follow up about the erosion control and full sun and HOA rules about trees. So wants to put in some shrubs. And I mean, I would recommend doing the strawberries as we were talking about, but then interspersing places with shrubs, like whether it's, I don't know how tall a shrub you want, but 9 bark would be great. It's just that, you know, the shrub is only going to hold the soil in that limited area it's in, whereas the strawberries will fill in between and not be a competition really for the shrubs. So I would do both. A lot of those shrubs that I mentioned are sun loving. I'm going to go turn on a light so my face isn't so weird here.
The evergreen huckleberry would be really pretty.
Wild rose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The nectar rose really spreads.
And the snowberry and ocean spray like are west facing.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That ocean spray would be really nice. Yeah. Yeah. I think I saw somebody else had a hand up and let's see. Good plant for a hilly shaded area with poor soil. Well, we all have poor soil. And a little bit shady. What I was just thinking about, well, in Osoberry likes it a little bit shady. Some plants I was just thinking of the other day that likes, oh, even I'm finding red flowering currant is happier in a partial shade. I don't know if anybody else is finding that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, somebody else has written, yeah, red flowering currant. Yeah, I think in full sun they get toasted too quickly. Oh, and vine maples, of course. Yeah, that would be lovely in a partially shaded area.
There you go. Go ahead. I think you can ask.
Yeah, how long does it take to get Salal to grow berries?
Hmm.
And does it need full sun?
No, on the full sun, but so I know we have some pretty good sized ones in our display garden. That's not very helpful because that's 25 years old. But they have tons of berries on them. But I don't know, does anybody else have experience? I have small plants in my own yard, but they're not bearing.
Well, they're slow growing, but when they, so I can't remember how long it took, but you know, they're quite big now. They're from when, you know, we planted them and it took them a long time to do anything. So they're not real fast. But now they're, you know, it's all relative, the time factor. It's like you forget that they were ever little.
Yeah, and a lot of native plants, just like non-natives, there's that maxim of first year it sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps, and that is really true. I have some small Salal, and but they're only in their second year, so they're kind of in that creeping phase. And I know that, you know, in another year they're going to start suddenly putting on more growth, and but it could be 10 years before you start to see. I see Stephen Kalma has his hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Go ahead. We've had some fir trees come down, so we have a large area where the soil's been disturbed by equipment pulling out the remains, and it's shady, but the lower parts of the fir are probably 10, 12 feet up, so it's not hard shade. I was looking for a fast growing ground cover for about 2,500 square feet. And wondering about native suggestions for something that would spread fairly fast for shade.
Yeah. I think. I kind of feel like, oh, you could just plant a whole bunch of sword ferns really close together and get it covered. Anybody else have ideas? This is like stump the chump.
Well, you'll think of
Strawberries
30,
grow really fast, and then you can put other things in between. But the strawberries, I was amazed how fast they would go, and we did ours were shady area.
the other
Is,
thing to do is to cover the ground with wood chips or something, just so you don't get the weed seeds.
Oh, good one. Yeah, that would help. That's a good idea. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
the wood chips will not, wood chips, not wood, not bark mulch.
No,
but
no.
wood chips. Yeah.
Yeah, we
And
have a few thousand feet of that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then that'll decompose and feed the soil too.
Yeah. There's a lot of plants that come up on the internet, but it's things that, you know, most of the fast growing ones seem to be things that are pretty invasive, and they say they may run across the rest of your yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of what not to plant.
Yeah.
I think the shade tolerant thing is hard to find a fast growing thing that's shade tolerant. Because, you know, I mean, ivy, yellow archangel, periwinkle, kudzu, all these things that are shade tolerant that grow fast are terrible plants. So
What about the
Yeah.
redwood sorrel?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say it's
I have it because I
pretty.
don't have shade, but Pam Pritzel has a lot of it on her property. It's really pretty. And it's a native, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the King County, is it the Plant Finder, King County Plant Finder? That would be a good place to type them.
Right.
is
So, yeah, I mean, even orange honeysuckle or the hairy honeysuckle, which would probably be more common down by you guys, which is a little bit more evergreen too. It's, you know, a viney plant. There's some berries, like, you know, people hate trailing blackberry because they trip on it, but it's native and
Mhm.
won't climb up trees and destroy them. But
Yes.
is the soil dry or wet?
Because it's you know, it's under fir trees, but they're up fairly high. It has some moisture. It's not dead dry like you would think of a dense forest. And it's nice woodland soil. It's been there a long, long time. It's pretty, you know, kind of black, crumbly in your hands. You want to put stuff in it, but you know, the few things that I see are, you know, like $8.99 a plant or something, and I'm thinking, well, 1,200 of these.
I have a lot of the fir trees pruned up a ways, and with good woodland soil, it dies back in the winter, but the false lily of the valley has done very well. It
All right.
can escape, but it's easy to pull up.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you want some, I can give you some shovels full.
Oh, you were too kind. Yes.
No, seriously, I have some that I'm trying to contain back. You know, it took a long time, but if you want some, I can give you some.
I would love that if you can, you know, make the connection.
Yeah, I'll
before.
connect through Val.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Steve,
Yeah. Yeah, so as Barbara was saying, the myanthemums, the false lily of the valley, there's star-flowered lily of the valley, and false Solomon seal are all in the same genus and would spread rhizomatously. Oh, and I don't know why I didn't think of it, but that meadow rue likes shade and it spreads rhizomatously. So I keep thinking of things that spread just a little bit underground, and Cooley's hedge nettle would, I mean, it could be a fabulous display. It's unlike true nettle, it's not stinging, but it's a soft leaf and produces a pink flower it's quite pretty. And right now it's just carpeting the area under my apple trees. It has taken that in like your second year is going to take off.
And say that name again.
Called Cooley's hedge nettle of Cooley apostrophe S. And then hedge nettles, all one word. But yeah, and Barbara's idea of the false lily of the valley, and maybe the sorrel, redwood sorrel too, but I think the others are a little faster. Take
We
off.
Sure.
have the sorrel, and we have a carpet that's just it's big leaf maple trees, leaves covered every winter or fall, and then in the spring they pop up, and it's
Yeah.
just-
And bleeding heart does really well in that condition too, and it'll spread surprisingly quickly if you get it established. And I have one friend that's gotten rid of Stinky Bob in her forested area, and the native seed bank that came up was bleeding heart, and it's just carpeting the area.
Wow. Cool.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so you actually, now that we started talking, we got lots of choices for you there.
Oh, I appreciate everybody's suggestions.
And,
Thank
and
you.
a lot of people will share those things because once you have them,
Sure.
they're good.
Yeah, if anybody needs a lot of firewood, I have some.
Yeah,
Barnum
Lisa's written,
Point-
I have so much bleeding heart. And
Barnum Point
fireweed.
has the Cooley's hedge nettle. If you want to see it before you
Sure.
look for it, if you're heading down the trail towards the beach, but you
Yes,
go off to the right, it's really wet there.
yes,
Beautiful, beautiful display last year. I haven't been there this year
okay.
to see
Yeah,
it.
yeah, no,
Right now
I'm-
around us, it's about 4 inches tall, so it's not
great.
gloomy.
Oh, it's not
Thank
blending
you.
yet. Okay, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and there's also off the record along there, you'll oftentimes find some trillium
Hmm.
along the same path.
Right, and that's something that could come up naturally in your area now that that's been disturbed there.
Yes,
Looks like Lisa had a question too. She's put in a lot of good comments. Oh, she took her hand down maybe.
She was wondering about how fast Oregon grape grow.
Pretty fast once it gets in the ground. I planted one that was probably just 2 feet tall 3 or 4 years ago, and now it's as tall as me. So again, it's one of those things that has to get established and then it really starts to grow. Oh, she has a question about huckleberry, but she can't mute. You could
Aha. There it goes. Can you hear me okay?
yeah. We can hear you, Lisa. Good. I'm happy to connect with people offline too.
Recently,
Email.
my husband and I, we adopted some mountain huckleberries. We saved them because they were going to get ripped out. And we're really, we hacked them back a little bit so that their roots will grow out. But do you have any tricks or tips? Because I know they're just a bear to try to propagate.
Yeah, are you talking about like the ones you'd find up at Shriver's Meadows or something, the membranaceum, or there's probably, I can think of 3 or 4 species. I guess it doesn't matter. You're not talking about the evergreen huckleberry. You're talking about the black huckleberry, maybe. I think her audio is in and out. I'm just gonna say, irregardless, I guess, they're all slow growing. The huckleberries are to get established.
It's the red Versilium.
Oh,
huckleberry,
Vaccinium.
The ones that you commonly will find. Thank you.
Yeah, parvifolium, I think it is. That one, you know, the
Little red berries,
Right.
deciduous kind of, and yeah.
So they have a relationship, a fungal relationship with a fungus that lives in decaying wood. So that's why we see them on stumps or, you know, growing in the woods where there's a lot of decaying woody debris. So when we plant them in the display garden or even in pots when we're getting ready to sell them, we add wood chips. So that would be one trick I would use, is like find some half decomposed wood chips, whether it's, you know, a broken up piece of wood that you have in your forest there. It doesn't have to already be decaying, but I think it would help a lot to have some kind of punky wood, mix it in the hole or the pot that you're putting the plant in, but in the hole would be fine. So there's some sort of, that's true for Western bunchberry too. A lot of people like to grow bunchberry, that pretty little dogwood that's a creeping dogwood ground cover. And it also has a dependence on fungus in the decaying wood. Good. Yeah, you planted them in mixed wood chips. That's
There's a question about is anything that can hold its own against ivy or Himalayan blackberries?
what you really got to take those things out, or, you know, dig out the crowns of the Himalayan blackberries. You can plant trees and shade them out over the long term, but unless you can entirely carpet your area with evergreen trees to shade them out, I think you really have to dig out the blackberries first. And the ivy, you know.
And what about nettles?
I just eat them. But they're, you know, being deciduous, again, sword ferns probably would crowd them out. You know, they're only going to come up between the sword fern fronds.
There's certain butterflies that require the nettles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This-
you can't have too many of them, and you sometimes you don't want them in. Well, you definitely don't want them in paths, but a few are good.
Yeah, really, I make a point of at least once a spring. I've already done it this year, of course, is to go someplace where I can pick the tops off of a lot of them, and I like them in a quiche. Nettle tea. So I don't have any in my yard, so I can't really speak for how annoying they could be in the yard. But I've worked around them a lot.
I had good luck when we first moved here. I did have some nettles, and wearing good gloves, not cloth gloves, because they can get you from on the backs, but just pulling them up and getting, you know, taking from the root and peeling them back. And a couple times of doing that, and I haven't had a nettle in the yard.
Yeah.
So when you're pulling them back by the roots, you'll be getting 2 or 3 years worth of them back, and I found that works really well.
Have you had any experience, Brenda, with the meadowscapes, Northwest meadowscapes?
Yeah, we buy seeds from them every year. We're trying different seeds, and I've, you know, other people that some of our volunteers have purchased seeds from them too. So yeah, it's a great source. And we try to, rather than buy the packages of mixed seeds, because we're trying to produce things to sell, knowing what it is. So we buy the single species of seeds. And this year, some of the things we have for sale, like Gilia, Globe Gilia, is from seeds we bought from them.
Good.
Yeah. And then another seed source, as long as I'm mentioning seed sources, the only two that I really know of are Meadowscapes, that's Northwest Meadowscapes, and Inside Passage. Inside Passage is in Port Townsend. And they just have very different lists. So I buy from both. Well, always a great group. You guys are really doing wonderful things there, having so many backyard habitats in one place. I'm envious.
Nice that people are joining in. It's a nice way to have an action step to try to help out.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, Brenda, that you continue to come and give programs and help us learn more about the native plants.
Yep, you've
Especially like-
definitely been a good incentive and good educator to help us to get there.
Oh, thanks. Well, and I learned so much each time. I mean, I know Barbara has been great about bringing us some plants, and I'm learning stuff from her and from you guys. You know, wonderful ideas. So
What about volunteers?
yes, we could always use more volunteers. We're getting ready. We do have the plant sale set up. You know, we need volunteers or needed volunteers for pulling orders and staffing the plant sale, but I think that's finally gotten filled up. But then after the plant sale, starting in, you know, in May through August, or through October, really, we'll need people to take turns watering the plants. What we don't sell at the spring sale, we will pot into larger pots, and some things are shrubs we purposely held back from the sale that we intend to sell in the fall, but we need to have those watered. And what we do is have a group of volunteers who each take one of 3 days during the week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Say I take Monday, somebody else takes Wednesday, somebody else takes Friday. And if there's a Monday I can't make it, we have a list of substitute watering volunteers. So it's a pretty easy gig to do. If anybody wants to join in on that fun, it's kind of meditative. It might take an hour and a half to 2 hours of your time to water the plants, but you're just kind of walking around, making sure each plant gets soaked on that day. And then we do have work parties where we all work together on particular projects, weeding or pruning, taking care of the display garden. That often results in propagating plants that we're taking out of the pathway, or, you know, trying to clean up the look of a particular part of the garden, or we may be planting out an area. So that's a big variety of different tasks. And if anyone wants to learn about those volunteer events, send me an email and I'll put you on the list. And you don't feel obligated to come to every one of them, but if there's something that piques your interest, you should feel free to come. You don't have to be a member of the Native Plant Society to volunteer for us. And we're starting to do more outreach things. I mean, there's programs like this, but we're also going to have a table at the Master Gardener Fair in early May. That's the Skagit Master Gardener Fair. But then there's also a number of events in the garden coming up. Like we've got school groups coming next week. One group of kids are coming to draw native plants because they're creating a field guide for Skagit County. These are second graders, so I don't know how that's going to come out. But I love it that they purposely want to draw native plants. And then we're not even participating in science nights in schools, and we would like to do that. So we have a new interest in our new chapter chair, Margie Miller, is very interested in outreach. And I think that she's going to be great at spearheading more events where we go and talk to people about native plants, either at a booth or an event of some sort. So if that kind of thing is of interest, it really use help for that. And volunteers often go home with plants.
Yeah. But you always have fun. It's a really good group.
We do, yeah. And there's good food.
Camaraderie.
All right. Well, thank you all very much, and hope to see you next month. Val, do you want to talk about next month?
Sure. Next month we will be doing pollinators. So Catherine, I've got a mental block. on
Owen.
his name.
Owens?
Owens will be doing several different aspects of pollinators and the plants that to keep them thriving. And like Brenda mentioned, how important the insects are. If we want birds, we need the insects. So and I like that part of your program, Brenda. But the pollinator program will get into that and flowers for them as well.
Oh, great.
That's May, not well, May. It's
Third-
April
third-
19th. Third Wednesday of May, which is May 17th.
All righty. We'll see you all next month.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.